Alex here with a high conflict child custody video on drugs and crimes. I haven't done this video because I kind of feel like I already got the point across with two of my other videos. But in both of those videos, I didn't really discuss specifically the topic of the impact drugs or criminal convictions can have on a child custody case. The first of those two videos is deserving custody. In that video, I talk about avoiding this idea that the person who deserves custody is going to get custody of the children. And I mean, that's kind of an oversimplification in many ways. In the context of the best interest of the child, yeah, a parent who deserves custody can get it, but watch that video and you'll see more what I'm talking about. The other video is custody by morality, which is this idea that if you are a morally righteous parent, you should get custody of the children, or if the other parent is not a moral person, and that tends to go into other areas like, well, you can watch the video. I don't need to cover that again. So drugs and crimes kind of ends up falling into those two categories for the most part. Not always, but for the most part. When it comes to crimes, usually the issue is that people will be going to court and they feel that their ex has criminal convictions, and therefore, since they don't have any criminal convictions and their ex does, then they should win and they should get custody of the children. And what I'm talking about is primary physical custody. Most people are not that interested in legal custody as much anyway, and most people are not that, well, most people who are trying to deprive another parent of custody, they're not thinking of that in terms of joint physical custody. They're thinking of a primary physical custody award. Some states call this residential custody, I think something like that. Anyway, not all crimes are relevant to the best interest of the child, and that's kind of what I need to get at with this video. There are best interest factors that the court will go through, and those are outlined in my video, best interest of the child, and those determine what kind of custody award the court will enter. And so if the crimes are connected to the best interest factors, then yes, there is going to be some impact there. And typically on the extreme end, we're talking about crimes that involve like sexual abuse of a child, crimes that involve child abuse, child neglect, because there are criminal statutes that cover that, crimes that involve domestic violence, because that overlaps with separate statutes in the family law area that discuss domestic violence and the impact it has on child custody awards. So if the crime connects with the best interest factors, then yes, it's likely that that'll make an impact on the case. The court will consider all the crimes, but the court will consider and, for the most part, ignore crimes that aren't connected to the best interest factors. So, you know, on the extreme end, that might be something like shoplifting, possession of marijuana. It gets, I think, tricky for some people when you get to violent crimes, and it can frustrate people because a violent parent might imply a bad parent, but it's not always that simple, especially if the parent is 38 and they have battery convictions from when they were 20. Maybe they got into a bar fight and they hit somebody with a stool. And these crimes could be serious. They could have spent a few years in jail. They might have been in a gang when they were a teenager or in their early 20s. And the court will understand that those things are alarming, but for the most part, it's going to come off as a comparison. It's going to come off as you saying, look, I'm better than them. I wasn't in a gang. I didn't beat anybody up in a bar and get jailed for a couple of years because I broke his arm and leg. And so give me custody. I deserve it. I'm a more moral person. Well, that may all be true, but is it in the best interest of the child? I talk about the problem with a child not having meaningful contact with both their parents in the video, frequent associations with child, I think it's called frequent associations with child. It may be called frequent associations with both parents, something like that. In that video, I explained that removing a parent from a child's life, and that includes reducing them to every other weekend parenting, that does count as removing a parent. It's not as bad as a termination of parental rights, but it has an impact on a child. Anyway, it causes a serious trauma to the child. That's what they've determined in various different studies. And so what it comes down to is is the trauma that the child is going to suffer from being in the custody of a parent who's committed certain crimes going to be more than or less than the trauma of removing that parent from the child's life? It's a comparison, it's a comparative analysis. And so while it may frustrate people, hey, this person's committed all sorts of crimes and they still got some meaningful custody, you should really take a step back and realize this isn't about who's better and who's worse. This is about whether or not they're unfit to parent the child. And a lot of these low-income families suffer from tough pasts that involve drug use, that involve violence, whether it's in school, gangs, or domestic violence in the home. And so the last thing that the courts want to do, at least if they're in compliance with Supreme Court precedent, at least if they're in Nevada, the last thing they want to do is just ignore all of that and perpetuate the cycle, which is to remove a parent from the child's life. And that is what they contemplate in some of those studies as one of the leading factors for children who turn around and get into drugs and gangs and teenage girls who get pregnant. So there's a comparative analysis going on there. It's not so simple as just any random crime is going to mean that you are automatically entitled to custody of the child, primary physical custody of the child. With regards to drugs, it's a little bit more complicated. With drugs, if somebody's actively using them, that's going to be a concern for the court. But that's, I don't want to say usually, but oftentimes that's not the case, and a parent is just bringing it up because they want to get a leg up and they want to win. Parents will bring up whatever. When a parent wants, especially a high conflict parent, especially a emotionally immature parent who just can't see beyond their own needs, a lot of times it comes down to the emotionally immature parent needs some sense of validation, some sort of badge of honor from having custody of the children to feel better about themselves, or in the alternative to not feel horrible, because like if they don't get that physical custody award, they're going to feel like trash and they're going to want to fall into depression or worse. That's usually the context in which your drugs are brought to the court. Oftentimes it's one parent saying, look, they use crack cocaine and marijuana and they did all these different drugs. Well, they don't do them now. Or the court may say, do they do them now? The court may say, well, you guys have been separated now for 9 months, and how have they been? Well, maybe being separated helped them kind of clear their head up. Maybe now they're not using drugs anymore. These are questions the court's going to ask. They're not unreasonable, and I think it frustrates a lot of people because there are a lot of people who haven't done any drugs, and they are frustrated that their child is going to spend a lot of time or even more time with someone that they perceive to be an immoral person because they've used a bunch of drugs, or a lot of times they will speculate that the person is dangerous or unsafe, but it's hard for the court to make a decision on pure speculation. Like I said earlier, if the person is actively using drugs, that's going to be more of an impact than if they used to use them, but they've moved on. And the courts are really reluctant to punish people for getting treatment. A lot of times people think, oh, I've got proof that they were in rehab, or that they went to a detox, or that they've been seeing mental health professionals about their drug use, and they'll use that in the courtroom. Well, the courts are reluctant to punish people for that because then that's going to set a precedent, or it's going to incentivize people to not go get treatment and to instead just try and cover it up and lie. So there are some situations where a parent comes in and they've been to rehab 3 times and they've been to detox twice and they're clean. They've been clean for maybe not years and years, but maybe like 8 or 9 months. And the court might take a step back and say, let's test them for a while. Let's test them for 3 months, make sure they're staying clean. And again, just as I mentioned with crimes, the court just wants to make sure that that parent is actually on the right track and getting better, because there is trauma inflicted on a child when you remove a parent from the child's life. So again, if you watch the video, Modification Trauma, I explain that it's not a sort of legal climate where they just deny all modifications. That's not true. It's just that they think carefully about modifying custody, because there is going to be a hit to the child's stability, and there is going to be a hit to the child for losing a parent. And so they just need to make sure that the damage inflicted on the child from being involved in that parent's life is greater than the damage from removing that child, the parent, from the child's life. I hope that this video connects with a lot of people. I know it's one of the most frustrating topics out there because there are a lot of parents who feel that they deserve or are entitled to a better custody award based on the crimes or on the drug use of their ex, and it's just not that simple because the court isn't focused on what that parent feels they deserve or what that parent feels, you know, they have earned. It's focused on what's going to make the children the happiest, the healthiest, and give them the most potential for a successful future. And sometimes that means giving the person who's committed some crimes or used some drugs a chance to be a parent so that the ideal situation, which is both parents being involved, could actually become a reality in that case. I think at this point I'm going to go ahead and end this video. If anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in the comments below. I will see you guys next time.